The Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came up and ate them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. And as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. And for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The Gospel of the Lord. Here on the North Fork, surrounded by farms and fields and vineyards, it's not too difficult for us to relate to the parable of the sower. And like many of you, I'm a gardener. I like to garden in tight little places, in raised beds, so that I can contain and manage the soil, use drip irrigation, keep out the grass and weeds, and maximize yield per square foot. Square inch gardening, it's called. Early in the season, I like to mix compost and manure with soil in proportions that, if not mathematically exact, take on a palette that pleases my eye and an aroma that delights my nose. I massage the soil so that clumps disappear, so that every seed that is planted can find a welcoming home. I create tiny little furrows in the bed with my fingertips and space each seed a fraction of an inch apart at just the right depth, creating a perfect womb for the tiny lettuce or radish or beet seed. Then I carefully bury each seed in the finely groomed soil and gently pack the ground around the seed so that when spring rains come, the moisture-laden soil will clothe each seed with life-giving water. And when the seeds burst open, shoots can reach skyward unobstructed by pebbles or clods, and tiny roots can burrow deeply in nutrient-rich soil. And so as a gardener who tends the soil and husbands every seed, I'm astonished at this story of the wasteful and squandering sower who tosses precious seeds about willy-nilly with nary a thought about where each seed might land. Matthew's sower of seeds seems to care not whether his seeds are sown on the road or on the rocks amid the thorns eaten by birds, or if they accidentally happen to find their way to decent ground. From the perspective of a grower and cultivator of fruits and vegetables, the sower's wild abandon leaves me bewildered. But as a former church planter and now a church grower, the story of the profligate sower is beginning to make a little more sense. One afternoon in my former church, a couple of years ago, a friend of a friend confided in me that our work there was of establishing a mission for the Episcopal Church had become a topic of conversation among various local pastors. Apparently, the conversation went something like this: I don't know how they can imagine that they can start a church the way they're doing it, reaching out to all kinds of people, welcoming people who don't belong here to start with, letting in gays and not even trying to change them, and going out of their way to welcome blacks and Mexicans. And don't they know that if they are going to build a church, they're going to need some rich people? I hear people show up on Sunday morning dressed every which way, and I can't even tell you what they believe. It sure doesn't seem to be in the Bible. Letting anyone in. People need unity. They need to know that on Sunday morning they'll be sitting beside someone like themselves. Now, what kind of a way is that to start a church? What kind of way indeed? Maybe just the way Jesus taught, by example and by word. He taught that as planters, we should fling seed in every direction, allowing the seed to fall and fly where it will, taking root in the most unlikely places. When I first arrived in town, a few well-meaning folks introduced me to bank officials, corporate executives, real estate developers, and old money families. I was graciously received, and I threw a few seeds in that direction, and some took root. But by and large, such ground proved a little stony. Those who are well established in the community typically have no trouble already being accepted wherever they go. And so it was, following the example of the extravagant sower. I shared the vision that a proper church grower should treat seeds as if they were as bountiful as the love of God, and cast them far and wide without regard where they landed. I imagine Jesus' sower standing in the middle of a field, a large burlap bag of seed draped over one shoulder, the bag wide open so that seed spills over the top and onto the ground. And the sower reaches in the bag and scoops out a magnificent handful of seeds and flings the seeds as far as he can in every direction, turning round and round, walking in ever-expanding circles, covering each surface of his field and his neighbor's field with precious but inexhaustible seed. And miraculously, no matter how much seed is flung from the bag, the abundance of seed contained within the bag doesn't diminish in the least. So it is with the love of God. The more we offer, the more we have to give. The sower of love discovers that God's love knows no limits. I sometimes speak of an ever-expanding circle of compassion. How, as we begin to understand the nature of the love of God, our own ability to love beyond the boundaries we once knew can also grow. Sowing seed widely serves to expand our earth circle of compassion. As we scatter seeds about and they sprout and find root, we find ourselves sharing the garden with all manner of God's created beings. And as we encounter people of other culture and circumstance and identity, the opportunity to grow compassionate toward them rises. Like the sower in the parable, if we are to grow our church, we must scatter the seeds of love widely, whirling like a dervish, throwing seeds round and round us in an ever-expanding circle of love and compassion. And some seeds will fall on stony ground, and some amid the thorns, and some will be baked by the sun, but some will sprout and take root. And before we know it, a garden will have sprung up around us, bearing fruit and yielding a harvest of love and compassion.